For over 2 millennia, the smartest doctors on Earth believed a woman's uterus could detach and wander around her body, and that the best cure was luring it back with pleasant smells. That wasn't a joke. That was medicine. Get ready for 32 scientific truths so profoundly absurd they make astrology look like rocket science. 1. For a solid 1,500 years, the universe was basically a massive ego trip for humanity. According to the Ptolemaic model, Earth was the unmoving, undisputed center of everything. The sun, the planets, the stars, they all spun around us in perfect, orderly circles, like we were some kind of cosmic celebrity. But there was a glitch in this self-centered matrix. Planets would sometimes appear to move backward, a phenomenon called retrograde motion. To explain this without giving up our VIP status, astronomers came up with epicycles. Imagine a planet moving in a small circle while the center of that circle moves in a bigger circle around the Earth. It was a ridiculously complex system of celestial gymnastics, all designed to avoid the simple truth that we weren't the main character. It took guys like Copernicus and Galileo to finally tell Earth to get over itself. 2. Welcome to nature's visual pharmacy, where the cure looks exactly like the problem. The doctrine of signatures was a wildly popular idea for centuries, proposing that God or nature had cleverly labeled plants for our medicinal use. It was like a biological cheat sheet. For instance, walnuts look like little brains, right? So, obviously, they were the go-to for brain ailments and headaches. A plant with kidney-shaped leaves must be for kidney problems. And lungwort, with its spotted leaves resembling diseased lungs, was the obvious choice for respiratory issues. It was a system based entirely on visual puns. This root looks like a gnarled finger, so it must cure arthritis. While some of these might have accidentally worked, the underlying science was just a game of cosmic I Spy. It was beautifully simple, creative, and almost certainly wrong. 3. How do you see the world? For over a millennium, the leading theory was that you shoot laser beams from your eyeballs. Seriously. The emission theory, championed by big thinkers like Plato, suggested that our eyes actively sent out invisible rays that would touch or feel objects, and that's how vision worked. You weren't just a passive observer of light. You were actively groping the universe with your ocular tentacles. How you could see the stars, which would require some impossibly fast and powerful eye beams, was a question met with a lot of awkward silence and convoluted explanations about the rays mixing with daylight. It's a fantastic, superhero-like concept of vision. Don't move. I'm about to scan you with my eye feelers. Thankfully, science eventually figured out light comes into our eyes, which is far less cool, but, actually correct. 4. Got a few bumps on your head? According to 19th century phrenology, that wasn't just your skull. It was a detailed map of your entire personality. This pseudoscience claimed that the brain was made of different organs for each personality trait, and the size of these organs was reflected in the bumps on your cranium. A phrenologist would feel your head, maybe with some fancy-looking calipers, and diagnose your character. A bump here might mean you have a strong love for your children, while a lump over there could indicate a tendency towards destructiveness or being secretive. Ah, I see from this prominent ridge that you're prone to poetic genius, but this small divot suggests you're terrible at making soup. It was essentially fortune-telling for your skull, treating the human head like a piece of biographical braille, and it was complete nonsense. 5. In the late 18th century, a German doctor named Franz Anton Mesmer introduced the world to animal magnetism. He claimed there was an invisible, universal fluid that flowed through all living things, and sickness was just a traffic jam in this cosmic goo. His solution? He would mesmerize his patients to get the fluid flowing again. This involved a lot of theatrical hand-waving, intense staring, and the use of magnets. His group sessions were legendary, with patients sitting around a giant tub of magnetized water, holding onto iron rods until they entered a mesmeric crisis, which often looked like a seizure or a trance. While commissions later debunked the whole invisible fluid idea, correctly identifying it as the power of suggestion, Mesmer had accidentally stumbled upon the foundations of modern hypnotism. He was wrong for all the right reasons. 6. For much of history, the difference between a living person and a sack of potatoes was explained by one simple concept: vitalism. This was the belief that all living things were powered by a non-physical life force, or a vital spark. It was a special, almost magical ingredient that animated organisms and made them fundamentally different from inanimate objects. You couldn't just mix the right chemicals in a lab and create life, because you were missing this mystical energy, this ghost in the machine. It was a neat way to explain the sheer complexity of life without getting bogged down in the messy details of biology. But then, as chemistry and biology advanced, scientists started showing that life's processes were just incredibly complex chemical reactions, no supernatural spark required. Life, it turns out, isn't magic. It's just very, very clever chemistry. 7. For thousands of years, the go-to diagnosis for almost any unexplained female ailment was hysteria, caused by a wandering womb. Yes, the prevailing medical theory was that a woman's uterus could detach itself and go on a joyride through her body, causing all sorts of havoc. If it traveled upwards, it could cause shortness of breath and fainting. If it decided to poke the liver, you'd get irritability. The treatments were just as bizarre. To lure the wandering organ back to its proper place, doctors would use pleasant smells down below. And to drive it away from the head, they'd use foul odors up top. One prescribed remedy even involved the smoke from roasted beaver testicles. It's a genuine wonder anyone survived ancient medicine. Imagine telling your boss you can't come in because your uterus is currently sightseeing in your upper chest. 8. If you had a toothache in ancient times, the diagnosis wasn't a cavity. It was an infestation of toothworms. That's right, for thousands of years, people across the globe believed that tiny, wriggling worms would burrow into your teeth and gnaw on them from the inside, causing agonizing pain. Proof often came from seeing tiny, worm-like nerve fibers in a decayed tooth. The cures were incredibly inventive. One popular treatment involved fumigating the patient's mouth with the smoke from heated henbane seeds. When the ash fell, it would wriggle in the air currents, looking exactly like the expelled worms. Other treatments involved bizarre potions or chanting spells to evict the tiny dental demons. It almost makes a modern root canal seem like a pleasant afternoon nap in comparison, doesn't it? 9. For centuries, the ultimate dream for inventors and schemers was the perpetual motion machine, a device that could run forever without any fuel. This wasn't just the obsession of eccentrics in their garages. Many brilliant minds genuinely thought it was achievable, designing fantastically complex contraptions of spinning wheels, imbalanced weights, and self-refilling water systems. They were essentially trying to find a loophole in the laws of thermodynamics, which, to be fair, hadn't been fully written down yet, making the whole quest seem a lot less crazy at the time. Every single attempt failed, of course, because the universe is a stickler for the rules of energy conservation. But in their magnificent failures, these inventors accidentally taught us a great deal about friction and mechanics. It was the ultimate search for a cosmic free lunch, but the universe's bouncer was always there to present the bill. 10. Before Darwin changed the game, French naturalist Jean-Baptiste Lamarck had a much more straightforward idea about evolution. His theory, often called the inheritance of acquired characteristics, was basically a workout plan for your descendants. The classic example is the giraffe. Lamarck suggested that as a giraffe stretched its neck to reach higher leaves, its neck would get slightly longer, and this new, longer neck would be passed down to its children. So, if you spent your life as a blacksmith and developed massive arms, your kids would be born with a bit of a head start in the bicep department. It's a tidy, appealing idea where effort is directly rewarded across generations. While we now know that's not really how it works, and that evolution relies on the much messier process of random mutation and natural selection, you have to admit Lamarck's version sounds a lot fairer. 11. This is a particularly grim example of how science can be twisted to serve prejudice. Craniometry, which was popular in the 19th century, was the meticulous measurement of human skulls. The practitioners of this pseudoscience believed that by measuring the size and shape of a person's cranium, they could determine their intelligence, their moral character, and, most chillingly, their place in a racial hierarchy. Scientists would collect skulls from all over the world, measure them with calipers, and then, shocker, publish findings that just so happened to confirm their own bigoted views about the superiority of their own race. It was racism disguised as empirical data, providing a veneer of scientific legitimacy for colonialism and oppression. It's a stone-cold reminder that data without integrity is just sophisticated propaganda. 12. If craniometry was science twisted for prejudice, eugenics was its monstrous, terrifyingly ambitious child. In the early 20th century, this movement gained a shocking amount of mainstream support, promoting the idea of improving the human gene pool. It had two sides. Positive eugenics encouraged people with desirable traits, which were always defined by the biases of the powerful, to have more children. But the far more sinister side was negative eugenics, which sought to stop those deemed unfit. The poor, the disabled, minorities, and the so-called feeble-minded from reproducing. This led to absolutely horrific policies, including forced sterilization programs in countries like the United States and Sweden, and ultimately provided a pseudoscientific framework for the atrocities of Nazi Germany. It is perhaps the most chilling example of scientific language being used to justify pure, unadulterated evil. 13. In the mid-1800s, a well-respected German chemist named Baron Karl von Reichenbach announced he'd discovered a brand new fundamental life force called the Oedic force. This Oed was supposedly a type of spiritual energy that radiated from literally everything: magnets, crystals, plants, and even people. The catch was, only special, sensitive individuals could perceive it. These sensitives would sit in darkened rooms and report seeing colorful auras or feeling strange sensations of hot and cold from automating objects. Reichenbach was convinced he was on the cusp of a revolution, a new physics of life itself. The only problem? No one who wasn't one of his pre-selected sensitives could ever see or measure this mysterious force. The Oedic force wasn't a scientific breakthrough. It was just the 19th century equivalent of someone claiming they can see your aura. 14. These days, astrology is mostly seen as a bit of fun, something to glance at in a magazine. But for thousands of years, it was treated as a deadly serious science. From ancient Babylon to Renaissance Europe, the smartest people on the planet believed that the positions of the stars and planets directly influenced everything from wars and famines to a king's mood and a patient's chances of surviving surgery. Emperors wouldn't make a major decision without consulting their court astrologer. Doctors would check star charts before performing an operation. This wasn't just vague fortune-telling. It involved complex mathematics and incredibly detailed celestial maps. Eventually, the actual science of astronomy showed that the gravitational pull of the doctor delivering a baby is vastly stronger than the pull of Mars. But for a very long time, your horoscope was considered less of a suggestion and more of a cosmic weather forecast you'd be a fool to ignore. 15. Before modern biology, one of the leading theories of reproduction was pre-formationism, and it is gloriously weird. The idea was that inside every sperm cell, or egg, depending on which side you were on, was a tiny, perfectly formed miniature human called a homunculus. Human development wasn't a complex process of cell division. It was just this little person growing bigger, like a microscopic inflatable doll. Some early scientists even swore they could see the little guy curled up inside sperm under their primitive microscopes. This led to a truly mind-bending paradox. If every man contained countless homunculi, did each of those tiny men also contain billions of even tinier sperm, with even tinier homunculi inside them, stretching back to Adam and forward to the end of time? It was an infinite Russian nesting doll of humanity, a concept bizarre enough to give anyone a headache. 16. Get ready for a theory that sounds like a bizarre plot from a supernatural drama. Telegony was the belief that a male could leave a genetic imprint on a female that could be passed on to her future children, even if he wasn't the father. It was the idea of a genetic ghost. So, if a woman had a child with one man, and then years later had a child with a second man, the new baby could still inherit traits from the first guy. The most famous proof was the case of Lord Morton's mare. He bred a white mare with a striped quagga, a type of zebra, which produced a striped foal. Then, when the same mare was later bred with a white stallion, it supposedly produced another foal with faint stripes. This was taken as evidence of the quagga's lingering influence. Thankfully, modern genetics proved this wrong, confirming that your future kids won't be haunted by the DNA of your ex. 17. Got a case of the Mondays? That's not your boss, that's just your black bile acting up. For over 2 millennia, Western medicine ran on the 4 humors theory, which was basically a personality quiz based on your internal goo. Your entire being, health, mood, character, was dictated by the balance of 4 fluids. Too much blood made you cheerful and optimistic. An excess of phlegm made you calm and a bit lazy. Yellow bile would make you angry and irritable, while a surge of black bile would leave you sad and depressed. The cures were as logical as the theory was sound. Bloodletting, forced vomiting, and strategic purging were all on the table to rebalance your system. Imagine calling in sick because your humors are out of whack and you need to go get drained. 18. Straight out of a horror movie, we have spontaneous human combustion. For centuries, reports trickled in of people suddenly bursting into flames and being reduced to a pile of ash, often leaving the room around them strangely untouched. Early scientific explanations were a wild ride, blaming everything from an overabundance of flammable bodily fluids, hello again, 4 humors, to built-up static electricity or even divine punishment for being an alcoholic. The reality is likely something called the wick effect, where a person's clothing catches fire from an external source like a cigarette, and then slowly smolders for hours, fueled by the person's own body fat, just like a candle. It's a gruesome and mundane explanation for a phenomenon that sounds terrifyingly supernatural. 19. Need some mice? For centuries, the accepted scientific recipe was simple. Just leave a pile of sweaty rags and some wheat in a dark corner, wait about 3 weeks, and voila, instant rodents. This wasn't some fringe theory. It was the mainstream doctrine of spontaneous generation. The idea was that life could just arise fully formed from non-living matter. Maggots didn't come from flies. They were born from rotting meat. Eels were created by river mud. It was a world where you might genuinely worry about a crocodile spawning in your puddle. It wasn't until Louis Pasteur came along in the 19th century with his swan neck flasks that he finally proved life only comes from pre-existing life, spoiling everyone's fun and making the creation of vermin a much more involved process. 20. Before we figured out that fire is just a really fast chemical reaction, 18th century scientists had a much more mystical explanation: phlogiston. This was a theoretical, invisible substance that was supposedly locked inside anything that could burn. When you set something on fire, you weren't burning the object itself, you were just releasing its phlogiston into the air. Things that burned really well were considered rich in this magical fire stuff. The theory hit a major snag when scientists noticed that metals actually got heavier after they burned. To explain this, they performed some epic mental gymnastics and decided that phlogiston must have negative weight. It was a brilliantly absurd patch for a theory that was, quite literally, full of hot air, until Antoine Lavoisier discovered oxygen and burned the whole idea to the ground. 21. Much like its skull-obsessed cousin, phrenology, physiognomy was the pseudoscience of judging a person's entire character based on their facial features. It was a system that allowed you to profile someone with a single glance. A prominent, sharp nose supposedly indicated a curious nature. A high forehead was a clear sign of intelligence. A weak or receding chin? Well, that meant you were probably cowardly and lacked resolve. For centuries, this was treated as a legitimate way to assess people, with extensive guides written to help you identify the facial features of a trustworthy person versus those of a scoundrel. It's the ancient scientific-sounding justification for judging a book by its cover, and great news for anyone with a naturally grumpy-looking face. We're not evil, we just look that way. 22. For more than 1,000 years, some of the greatest minds on Earth were obsessed with alchemy, the original get-rich-quick scheme with a mystical twist. The primary goal was transmutation, the art of turning cheap metals like lead into pure, glittering gold. But it was more than just about wealth. It was a spiritual quest for the legendary philosopher's stone, a substance that could grant eternal life and cure all diseases. Alchemists worked in secret, surrounded by bizarre ingredients, complex charts, and bubbling potions, convinced they were on the verge of unlocking the universe's deepest secrets. They never did manage to turn lead into gold, but in their endless, obsessive experimentation, they accidentally invented a lot of the lab equipment and chemical procedures that would eventually give rise to modern chemistry. So, while they failed at their main goal, we still have them to thank for the beaker. 23. Even Albert Einstein, a man whose name is synonymous with genius, wasn't immune to the scientific groupthink of his day. When his theory of general relativity predicted that the universe must either be expanding or contracting, it flew in the face of the accepted idea that the universe was static and eternal. So, to make his math fit the popular narrative, he introduced a cosmological constant, a mathematical fudge factor he added to his equations to hold the universe still. A few years later, when astronomer Edwin Hubble proved the universe was, in fact, expanding, Einstein called the constant his biggest blunder. In a hilarious cosmic twist, however, modern physicists have brought back the cosmological constant to help explain dark energy and the accelerating expansion of the universe. Even Einstein's mistakes were ahead of their time. 24. Forget a solid planet with a molten core. For a surprisingly long time, a popular and persistent theory was that the Earth is completely hollow. And we're not just talking about a few big caves. Proponents envisioned a vast open interior, potentially containing entire continents, strange creatures, and even its own tiny sun hanging in the center. The famous astronomer Edmund Halley, of comet fame, was an early supporter of a multi-layered hollow Earth. Later, an American Army officer named John Cleves Sims Jr. dedicated his life to convincing the U.S. government to fund an expedition to the North Pole to find the giant hole he was sure led to the world within. While modern seismology has confirmed that our planet is very much filled with rock and metal, you have to admit that the idea of a secret prehistoric world hidden just beneath our feet is way more exciting. 25. This wasn't just a mistake. It was one of the greatest scientific faceplants of all time. In 1912, an amateur archaeologist named Charles Dawson unveiled the Piltdown Man, the supposed missing link between ape and man, found in a humble English gravel pit. It had a human-like skull and an ape-like jaw, which was exactly what British scientists at the time believed an early human ancestor should look like. The scientific community celebrated this groundbreaking English ancestor for over 40 years, patting themselves on the back for the discovery. It wasn't until the 1950s that new tests revealed the embarrassing truth. The Piltdown Man was a complete fraud, the skull of a modern human, the jaw of an orangutan, and teeth that had been artificially filed down and stained to look ancient. It's a legendary reminder that sometimes the urge to believe something can be way more powerful than the urge to check if it's actually true. 26. During the height of the Cold War, Soviet scientists announced a discovery that sent a shockwave through the scientific world: polywater. This wasn't your normal boring water. This was a super-dense, syrupy version that boiled at scorching temperatures and wouldn't freeze until it was colder than a Siberian winter. The West panicked. Was this a new state of matter? A miracle substance? Or, as some feared, was it a doomsday material that could escape the lab and turn all the world's oceans into a thick, lifeless jelly? The fear even inspired Kurt Vonnegut's novel, Cat's Cradle. After years of frantic research and debate, the truth came out. Polywater wasn't a new form of water at all. It was just regular water that had been contaminated by chemicals leaching from the glass tubes. It was the scientific equivalent of a world-ending threat being caused by someone forgetting to wash their dishes. 27. Prepare yourself for a theory so bizarre, it makes all the others look downright reasonable. In the early 20th century, an Austrian engineer named Hans Herberger unveiled his world ice theory. His grand idea? Everything in the universe is made of ice. The moon, ice. The planets, ice. The stars, also ice. The Milky Way? You guessed it, a giant swirl of ice. According to Herberger, who claimed the entire theory came to him in a vision, solar flares were caused by giant blocks of ice crashing into the sun, and lunar craters were the impact sites of icy meteors. Despite being utterly demolished by actual physics and astronomy, his theory gained a massive, almost cult-like following in Germany. Herberger was so confident that he reportedly told his critics, "You either believe in me or you will be treated as an enemy." Talk about a frosty reception. 28. This theory placed an unbelievable amount of pressure on pregnant women for centuries. It was called maternal impression, and the idea was that whatever a pregnant woman thought, felt, or even saw could directly imprint itself onto her unborn child. If a woman was frightened by a mouse, her baby could be born with a mouse-shaped birthmark. If she had a sudden craving for cherries while touching her arm, her child might have a permanent red mark in that exact spot. This led to all sorts of wild advice, urging expectant mothers to constantly surround themselves with beautiful art and positive thoughts, lest they accidentally scar their child for life with the image of a weird-looking neighbor or a scary-looking dog. It was a 9-month-long exercise in avoiding anything that might turn your baby into a living scrapbook of your daily anxieties. 29. When 19th-century astronomers pointed their new, powerful telescopes at Mars, they saw faint, straight lines crisscrossing the planet's surface. An Italian astronomer named them canali, meaning channels, but the word was famously mistranslated into English as canals. This single word sparked a global obsession. A wealthy American astronomer, Percival Lowell, became convinced that these were not natural features, but a massive, planet-wide irrigation system built by a desperate Martian civilization to bring water from the poles to their dying cities. He spent years meticulously mapping hundreds of these canals, fueling decades of science fiction about advanced Martian engineers. It was a beautiful, romantic idea that captivated the world. The only problem? It was all an optical illusion. Better telescopes and space probes revealed a dry, cratered world with no canals, proving it was all just a case of cosmic wishful thinking. 30. Here's a theory born from pure, unadulterated optimism. As settlers pushed west into the arid plains of America in the 19th century, they were armed with a comforting belief: rain follows the plow. The idea was that the very act of human settlement, plowing fields, planting trees, even the smoke from locomotives, would magically increase local rainfall and transform the desert into a lush garden. Land speculators and railroad companies promoted this heavily, assuring farmers that if they just put in the work, the heavens would reward them with rain. For a while during a wet cycle, it even seemed to be working. But nature doesn't grade on effort. The theory was completely wrong, and when the inevitable droughts returned, the result was catastrophic, leading to failed farms, heartbreak, and the ecological disaster of the Dust Bowl. 31. In 1903, the French scientific community was buzzing with excitement over a new discovery by a respected physicist named Prosper René Blondelot. He claimed to have found N-rays, a completely new form of radiation. He and his colleagues published paper after paper detailing their amazing properties, and for a brief time it looked like France was at the forefront of a physics revolution. There was just one tiny, insignificant problem. N-rays weren't real. The delusion came crashing down when an American physicist, Robert W. Wood, visited Blondelot's lab. During an experiment, Wood secretly pocketed a key piece of the detection equipment, an aluminum prism. Blondelot, completely unaware, continued to see and described the effects of the non-existent rays in detail. It was a classic case of seeing what you want to see, mixed with a healthy dose of national pride. 32. In 1989, two chemists, Martin Fleischmann and Stanley Pons, held a press conference that shook the world. They announced they had achieved cold fusion, nuclear fusion in a jar at room temperature. It was the holy grail of energy, a clean, cheap, and virtually limitless power source that could be built on a tabletop. The media went into a frenzy. Was the energy crisis solved forever? Labs around the globe scrambled to replicate the experiment, but almost no one could. The initial excitement quickly soured as other scientists picked apart their work, finding sloppy methods and unverified data. The dream of cold fusion collapsed into one of the most infamous scientific controversies of the 20th century. It remains a powerful lesson that if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is, especially when it involves rewriting the laws of physics in a beaker. And that's just 32 headstones in the massive cemetery of bad science. But we know the list isn't complete. History is filled with this stuff. So, what's the one unforgivably dumb theory we completely ignored? The one that makes you scream at the screen for its absence? Drop the single most embarrassing scientific blunder we missed below. And if you enjoy laughing at the mistakes of history's geniuses, prove it with a like and subscribe for more.